So one of the big confusing parts of this is there's a whale situation on the Atlantic side, and then there's a whale situation on the Gulf side. The Atlantic side is currently a NOAA proposed rule. So NOAA is actually in the rulemaking phase very, very early on in a proposed rule. Whereas in the Gulf of Mexico, we are talking about Rice's whales, and NOAA has not made any movement on Rice's whales. NOAA hasn't even finished designating a critical habitat for Rice's whales. NOAA scientists have said that they're not even sure if the animal can recover, that there might be too few of this animal already, 51 believed individuals in the population in the Gulf of Mexico, which might already be too low. NOAA said that there has to be more than 100 individuals to prevent inbreeding over the next 5 generations to allow that whale and species to kind of recover. So we might already be past a point of no return for the species, unfortunately, according to NOAA. And their response to the petition was to open up a comment period, which just recently closed. And they received somewhere in the neighborhood of, I've heard 60, I've heard 70, I've heard 75,000 comments. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 75,000 comments were received. And it's going to take NOAA a few months to sort through those comments. As far as my reaction to it, I laughed. I thought it wouldn't get this far. I never thought in a million years it would get the consideration it's gotten because it's so ill-conceived. It's so early on, and it's not backed by any science remotely. And it's too early. I mean, they don't have the information they need to really do this sort of rulemaking. 10 knots is 11 and a half miles an hour. 11 and a half miles an hour, which is extremely slow. And it's just unsafe. And the biggest problem that I see with, there's a few really big problems, but one of the biggest problems I see with this is the interchangeable use of vessel and ship in the petitioner's writings. A ship is very different from a vessel. A vessel could be any boat on the water, whether it's a small boat, big boat, large boat, or a ship. A ship is a very large vessel that has a draft of 8 meters or more, that is displacing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of gallons of water. It's a very large vessel that's inmaneuverable, that really can't turn or slow down in any way, really, if it's spotted a whale. Whereas a vessel is typically a smaller boat. And recreational vessels are typically less than 120 feet, are typically drafting much less than 4 meters of water. We're talking generally a draft of anywhere from 2 to maybe 8 foot at most. So a very small recreational vessel isn't going to have an impact on one of these whales. And the only recent recorded history of a vessel strike on a whale by a recreational vessel didn't happen in the Gulf. It happened to a North Atlantic right whale off of Northeast Florida. These right whales happen more closely to the coastline, and they kind of hang on the surface. So they're definitely in a little bit of a different category than these Rice's whales. And we know a lot more about the right whale. And what happened was a 54-foot sport fishing vessel, a very large motor yacht, crashed into a small baby North Atlantic right whale. And it severely injured the craft because it happened at night. That's the only reason they hit the whale. They didn't see it. It happened at night, and the vessel actually sunk, and the passengers on board had some pretty severe injuries. So for the petitioners to assert that a recreational vessel that's less than 120 foot on average, and it's going to have a very shallow draft, to assert that we could hit one of these whales and not know about it is absurd. It's asinine. It's heinous, because if a recreational vessel was to hit one of these whales, the boat's going to sink. It's going to rip the running gear right out of the back of the boat. It's going to hurt someone, if not kill someone, where you would never purposefully or really even accidentally hit one of these whales. We're going to be able to see this thing. We're going to be able to avoid this thing. It's really, really ridiculous to have this sort of regulation, especially before we have any sort of defined habitat, before we know what the preferred prey item is, before we know if the whale has already passed the point of no return. If the population is already so small that they're not going to be able to recover, why make such an arduous, draconian measure when we don't have the science to support any sort of regulation in the first place?